This is Note Taker 30, Interactions Among Living Things. On this note taker, we are going to start our ecology unit, which is going to be an entire last 9 weeks. With this specific note taker, we are going to define what ecology is, what an ecosystem or environment is, and then we're going to look at the breakdown within an environment or an ecosystem. Now, when we talk about an environment is going to consist of all the living and non-living things with which an organism is going to interact with in an area. Now, there are 2 words that you need to fill into your notes. All living things are called biotic, and if you look at the prefix bio on the wall in the classroom, it does mean life, for living. Non-living things are abiotic, and again, if you look at the wall in the classroom, the prefix a means without, so abiotic means without life. Now, living things don't just exist, they actually interact constantly. They interact with other living things, but they also interact with some non-living things that are in the environment. For example, there are some organisms that can actually change in response to their environment. Some are very quick, like a flounder or even an octopus can actually change color to match the sand on the ocean floor. Others are going to be much slower, like over time, trees that grow in certain areas where the wind always blows in the same direction will eventually start to lean in the direction that the wind is blowing. So if the wind is blowing towards the south, the trees will start to lean south. And this is so that they don't get damage to their branches and their leaves. Other things can be changed based on the living things in the environment. So earthworms. Earthworms are great to have in your soil. They actually dig tunnels, and that helps to aerate or bring little areas of oxygen into our soil for plants to grow. Woodpeckers, they actually drill drill holes in the trees looking for insects, but it does leave a hole with which other things can live in. And if anybody has ever walked in downtown Fredericksburg, you know this last example. Tree roots, as they grow, will actually break up sidewalks. And years ago in downtown Fredericksburg, they planted trees along the road to make it look pretty. Well, as the trees have grown, their roots have spread out, and a lot of the sidewalks are now uneven. This slide shows a flounder. Actually, each picture is a flounder that has changed its color to blend with its environment. The top one looks like it blends in with a more pebbly, a rockier bottom. But if you look at the one on the bottom, it's very light colored, and it's also flipped a little bit of sand on top of it, and it blends in very well and hides there. Here's an example of the tree growing crooked based on the direction of the wind. When we study how living and non-living things interact with each other, we're studying ecology. So an ecologist is someone who studies how these things interact. And ecologists, when they look at an area, they will actually break it down into what they call ecosystems. So an ecosystem is an area that consists of all the living and non-living things that interact. So an ecosystem and environment, I'll be using these words interchangeably throughout our 4th 9 weeks. With an ecosystem, it may be as tiny as a drop of pond water. The water itself would be your non-living. And then inside that drop of pond water, there are all sorts of microscopic organisms floating around. These would be your living component of that ecosystem. Now, if we wanted to look on a larger scale, if you look at the woods behind school, a forest, that could be considered an ecosystem. Or with communication and travel, we can even consider the whole world an ecosystem. And here are 2 examples of sizes of ecosystem. The top picture shows something as small as a drop of water, and the bottom one shows one of quite a large rainforest that can be considered an ecosystem. Now, when we look at ecosystems, we look at all the living and non-living things. So if we looked at your neighborhood as an ecosystem, we're talking about all the people that live there, all the other animals that live there, the birds, the cats, the dogs, the squirrels. We're looking at all the plants, the grass, the trees. We're looking at even something as small as bacteria. But then we also need to consider in that neighborhood ecosystem, we are going to consider the non-living things. So we have air, we have water, we have rocks. So all this makes up an ecosystem. If we want to break down the ecosystem further, we can look at all the living things. So all of the living things in your neighborhood, like your bacteria, your plants, your trees, your squirrels, your dogs, your cats, all the people, all the birds, they're going to make up the community. Now we can break a community down even further. And a community is made up of different populations. So a population is going to be each kind of living thing. So we might say the population of gray squirrels in your neighborhood. We might say the population of dogs in your neighborhood, because all of your dogs are going to be the same species. We can talk about all of the population of maple trees or red maples or sugar maples. So population is going to be a group of one type, the same species of a living thing living in your area. And then we can even break our population down to the individual. We can talk about one gray squirrel that lives in your neighborhood or one specific tree that lives in your neighborhood, and that would be the individual. This slide shows you how you can break down the ecosystem, the community, and the population within a pond ecosystem. So if we talked about the entire pond, all of the water, all of the air that surrounds it, all of the rocks, and then we talk about all the living things in it, like the fish, the snails, the frogs, the water plants, the algae, all your microscopic organisms, we have an ecosystem. If we look at just the community of the pond, a pond community, we're looking at the living things, the fish, the snails, the frogs, the water plants, the algae, the microscopic organisms. And then we can break it down to a population. So I might have a population of perch or a population of leopard frog. So I can have a specific group which makes my population. Here is the picture of the pond ecosystem, and you can see all of the living and non-living things represented in this picture. If I wanted to make this ecosystem instead of a pond ecosystem, if I wanted to talk about the pond community, I would have to take away all of the non-living things. So what I'm left with in this picture are all the living things that are around the pond. I have the beaver, the turtles, the fish, the frogs, the dragonflies, the plants, and even a little bunny rabbit over in the grass. And I could break it down to populations if I look at just one specific living thing. I can talk about the population of dragonflies or the population of a certain type of water plant. Please do not forget to complete the assessment that follows this note taker.